Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 220 of the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read. I'm Emily.
And I'm Chris. And we're coming to you from the shoreline of Connecticut, the southern edge of New England, where the leaves are still glorious.
They are. It's been a beautiful fall.
Yes.
And it's going to be 75 degrees today, which is kind of mind-blowing.
Yes, it is, for sure. Well, we wanted to start off with some thank yous. We have new patrons to thank. Francis and Heather, welcome.
Thank you so much. And you joined just in time to be in the running for our November giveaway. We give away a book via our Patreon community once a month on the 15th of the month. And this one is 8 Very Bad Nights, a collection of Hanukkah noir. And this is edited by Todd Goldberg. It has the greatest cover. It's a dreidel with a skull and a knife on it.
Yes, it's fantastic. And Todd Goldberg is one of the co-hosts of Literary Disco.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to read this collection. Thank you so much to Soho Crime for sending us this copy.
And it's another 10th episode, and longtime listeners know that every 10th episode we give away a book or two, or sometimes more, depending on what's going on. So here we are at 220, and we have 2 wonderful books to give away to a newsletter subscriber.
Yes. So if you are already a newsletter subscriber, you're automatically entered to win. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, check the show notes. All of that information is there. You just go to bookcougars.com, and we send out 1 newsletter a month and also do giveaways. So the 2 books we're giving away for episode 220 are The Gardener's Plot, a mystery by Deborah J. Benoit. This was a First Crime Novel Award winner from Minotaur Books. This one looks like so much fun. And then the other one is from William Morrow, and it's The Author's Guide to Murder, What's a Little Revenge Among Friends? And this is written by 3 authors, Beatrice Williams, Lauren Willig, and Karen White. They are out on book tour now. This book is getting a lot of fun press. 2 fun mysteries for y'all.
Yes, and our newsletter is completely free, so no risk to sign up for that.
Right. And both of these giveaways will take place on November 15th. Good luck, everybody. We also want to remind you about our 4th quarter read-along. This is the last book we'll be reading in our year of reading romance.
Right. It's A Little Bit Country by Brian Kennedy.
We've given a copy of this away to a newsletter subscriber already, and we will be reading it and discussing it via Zoom on December 8th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. There's also a Goodreads thread open if you want to discuss it there.
Yeah, and all of our read-along Zoom conversations are free and open to everyone. You do have to register for it. We ask that you send us an email, bookcougars@gmail.com. And for this particular conversation, since it is the last in our year of reading romance, as Emily mentioned, we'll take the first hour from 7 to 8 to talk about A Little Bit Country. And then we'll take a 5-minute break and then talk for maybe a half hour. We'll see how long, how much people have to say to talk about all 4 of the books that we read this year and people's experience with reading romance in general. Maybe books that they've really enjoyed, what they've come to understand that they like or don't like about different subgenres or writing styles, levels of intimacy expressed on the page, and things like that. Normally, these Zoom conversations go for an hour, but since it's the last one, we're going to go a little bit longer. But if you can only stay for an hour, that's why we're going to have a 5-minute break, so it'll be easy for you to go about your evening.
Sneak out of the Zoom room.
Yes.
And then I think there'll be an episode where we talk, maybe after we do that and hear what other people have to say, we'll talk about our experience reading romance, because we've also obviously been reading a lot of other romances, not just the read-alongs. I've learned a lot, and I'm really glad that we chose this as a focus this year.
Same. And then at the end of this episode, we have a discussion with our mystery man, John Valeri. We are discussing a novel published in 1983, Murder in the Smithsonian by Margaret Truman. So definitely stay tuned for that.
So, Chris, what are you currently reading?
Well, I'm still plugging away at Armadale by Wilkie Collins. I think I have about 200 pages left, maybe slightly less. And I'm really loving it. It has been a slow read. I've been trying to do like an hour or at least 20, 25 pages a day just to keep my flow going. And even though the new Louise Penny came out yesterday, I decided to keep going with Armadale because I don't want to lose momentum with it. And I also don't want to feel torn between two lovers. So
I'm picking my jaw up off the table. I can't believe it.
So,
when I first met Chris years ago, she would take that day off when Louise Penny's newest novel came out, and she would just read all day.
I know. That didn't happen this year for a variety of reasons, but I do have a copy in my sweaty little hand. More on that later.
I'm reading When We Flew Away, a novel of Anne Frank before the diary. This is by Alice Hoffman. This is a middle reader book, so 10 and older maybe. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a fictionalized account of Anne Frank's time leading up to when she became held in an attic and wrote the diary of Anne Frank. I listened to an interview with Alice Hoffman this morning with Adriana Trajani on her podcast, You Are What You Read. And Alice Hoffman talked about, for the first time ever in her career, and she's written over 30 books, her English editor came to her and said, I want you to write this book. She'd never been asked to write a book about something. She said yes right away. And if you look on the back of this book, it says published in cooperation with the Anne Frank House. So Alice Hoffman did a lot of research. She went to Amsterdam, which is where Anne Frank was living. I'm about 30% in. I've been reading it and listening to it, and it's narrated by Mara Wilson. And it really opens up in May of 1940 with Anne. I've always called her Anne, but in the audiobook it's pronounced Anne, where Anne is this young, vibrant 11-year-old. She's mischievous. And then there's her sister Margot, who's older and more beautiful and is a rower in her high school, whereas Anne goes to a Montessori school where she's encouraged to be more creative. I'm really enjoying the challenging friendship that she has with her sister, but also really important friendship. And there is this foreboding where you know what's coming ahead for Anne, but you're learning about who she is. So far, I'm enjoying it. It's also incredibly scary and frightening because of what's happening in the world right now. And that's something that Alice Hoffman talks about, that she wanted to really show people how quickly lives change in unexpected ways. She also did recommend that if you have a child who's reading it, it'd be really good to read along with them so you can talk about what's happening. I'm learning a lot about history. I love reading YA because I feel like it delivers history in a way that's really understandable for me. Again, it's called When We Flew Away, a novel of Anne Frank before the diary by Alice Hoffman. And then the audiobook is really good as well.
I do plan on reading that, so I'm happy that you've started and are getting that ball rolling for the book Cougars. Thank you. Well, the only other thing I'm reading right at the moment is actually a short story. I started it last night, and it was longer than I anticipated, perhaps, because I'm reading it on an app on my iPad, and that is The Bolted Door by Edith Wharton. And this is a short story. It's the first one in her book, Tales of Men and Ghosts, which was published in October 1910. I read a different story in there first, and I'll talk about that later. So this book I was able to download from Project Gutenberg. Listeners, if you don't know about that yet, it's a great resource for getting free ebooks that are classics, books that are out of copyright. You can get everything that's been published pretty much up to like 1924 at this point. So I downloaded it from there, and I just found that the app on my iPad, the Apple Books app, opens it beautifully. So I've been using that app for the first time. And I just love Edith Wharton. We both do. We know a lot of our listeners do as well. And this story is about a man who inherited a lot of money. He's turned 50, so from his 40s to his 50s, he's been trying to make it as a playwright. And he has tried to write all sorts of different plays. And the last play he submitted was one written in blank verse. The editor wrote back and said, you've tried everything and we're not accepting this either. So he feels like he's just wasted 10 years of his life, the prime of his life, and he doesn't want to live, but he can't take his life either. So he's trying to do something so that other people will take it.
Oh my, that sounds dark.
It is a dark setup. This story is set on the Lower East Side, and things are changing a lot. Granted, this is published in 1910, right? When the automobile is really starting to take over. So a lot of the stables and boarding places for horses have become garages for cars now, or they've just been torn down and garages built and things like that. And there's a line that she writes: "The shifting life of New York had passed its rapid sponge over every trace of their obscure little history." And I just love that image of a rapid sponge just wiping out history.
Yeah.
It's really an interesting story, and I can't wait to get back to it. I was reading up until I had to finally hop in the car to come over here to Book Cougars headquarters. So again, that's The Bolted Door by Edith Wharton.
And we'll put a link in the show notes to the Project Gutenberg so you can read it as well. Well, I wanted something a little bit light. And so I found a new poetry collection that just came out called A Bit Much, Poems by Lindsay Rush. And I'd never heard of Lindsay Rush. I'm late to the Lindsay Rush party. Lindsay Rush goes by this handle on Instagram, Mary Oliver's Drunk Cousin, which at first I was like, really? But it's very funny. And she's really making light of herself and being a woman and the expectations that are on us. So all of the poems are not written with Mary Oliver in her mind, but this particular one is, so I thought I would just read it for you. So you know when Shuli Kaywood was on and she told us about how in her collection you might have a title and then it'll say after somebody. So in other words, you read something that inspired you to write this poem. So Mary Oliver has a very famous poem called Wild Geese that a lot of people know of. And this is Lindsay Rush's version. It's called Wet and Wild Geese, after Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good at makeup. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through a Sephora, repenting. You only have to let the soft contours of your face look how it looks.
I like that.
I thought it was so good. She's very irreverent, very funny. I'm just dipping into the collection one poem at a time. I got it via Hoopla, so I'm reading it on my phone mostly. I just love it. So if you're looking for something light and fun and maybe get a few laughs in a time where we could use a little laughing, again, it's called A Bit Much by Lindsay Rush.
Nice. Well, even though you're late to the party, you're going to get us all to rush out and read her.
Ooh, good one, Chris.
Arr. So, Emily, what have you just read?
Well, I want to talk very briefly about the two romance novels that we talked about last time that I was currently reading that I did finish. One is called Birding with Benefits by Sarah T. Dubb. This is one that we had considered as maybe the fourth quarter read-along. This is a debut novel. It's about Celeste, who is divorced. She has a daughter about to go off to college. She's trying new things, and she goes on a fake date with a man, and they end up falling for each other. There's a birding contest going on, so they spend time birding. One of the things we talked about when we were talking about this last episode is there was a lot of talking during sex that was kind of taking me out of the story. But I did a little bit more thinking about it, and that is still true. I felt that way. But I also was reminded of how when we went to that romance conference, they talked about how romance is very forward thinking. It teaches people a lot of things. And Sarah Dubb is a librarian as her day job. And I feel like she was also trying to teach people things, particularly during sex, women asking for what they want and what feels good. And so there were some times where I was like, oh, way too much talking. There's a scene when they first go to have sex where there's a lot of talking about consent and birth control. And part of me was rolling my eyes, but then I thought, no, that's really good. If a teenager is reading this, I want them to think about consent and birth control. So even though there were things that were bothering me about it, I also was able to step outside of myself and think about the world of romance and what novels can be used for.
Yeah, and kind of like normalizing those very important conversations.
Exactly. And then the only other thing I wanted to say about this is in the acknowledgments, she thanks Jessica Pride, who we've had on the podcast, who is also a librarian in the Tucson, Arizona area, as a role model and someone who helped her. So I thought that was really cool because Tucson, if you are an Arizona lover or you like to read about books that take place in a particular space, Tucson, Arizona is a character in this novel as well. The other romance novel I finished was The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. This is about Florence Day, who's a ghostwriter for a very famous novelist. And she's on deadline. She's had a terrible breakup and she's having trouble writing an HEA. She gets called away from New York City to go back to her hometown where her family owns the local funeral parlor. Florence Day can see ghosts. A ghost becomes a character in this story and she's falling in love with the ghost. And I'm very curious as I'm reading it how they're going to do any hanky-panky if it's a ghost. Longtime listeners might remember that I actually read a novel where someone was having hanky-panky with a ghost that I found very difficult to believe. I'm not going to spoil this for anybody, but things do happen that surprised me and I really enjoyed it. It was very light. It was very fun. I enjoyed her writing and I thought the conceit of both Birding with Benefits and The Dead Romantics were really great. Like these authors, kudos for them for coming up with fun storylines.
Nice. Well, I finished the romance I'd been listening to, Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall, narrated by Joe Jameson. Oh my gosh, I love this novel so much, and it is one of my top 3 audiobooks now. And thank you to Sigrid for recommending it. Absolutely such a breath of fresh air, this book. And it's about fake dating. I mean, of all the like subgenres of romance, I would think fake dating would be my least, or I'd be least interested in it. Wrong about that with this book. It came out in 2020. It has a great following. I know that now. And it's the story of Luke O'Donnell, who is the son of former rock stars. The mother is no longer writing or performing. She hasn't been for a long time. She's from France, very wonderfully portrayed in the audiobook. And the father has never been in Luke's life. And he's just a selfish bastard, I guess you could say. Luke has a series of unfortunate events where he's in the tabloids a lot with nasty photos because they're tabloids. So they want to catch people doing suspicious looking things. And the last straw, it looks like he's passed out in a gutter with sexy kitten ears on his head. His boss calls him in. He works for a very conservative donor-based nonprofit trying to save the dung beetle. His boss is like, you need to clean it up. You need to become a more responsible looking gay. You need to get it together. So you need to get a boyfriend who's going to help you look more respectable. So he has a mutual friend who sets him up with somebody, Oliver Blackwell. And these two know each other. They have a slight history. They've never dated or anything like that before, but they are aware of one another and have had interactions and stuff. Very opposites. Luke seems very young and irresponsible. He hasn't been taking care of himself for a good 5 years. His apartment is a trashy mess. He is heartbroken from being dumped from his last relationship. And you find out more about that as the story goes along. But Oliver is a very put together barrister, upper middle class family, very posh, you think, put together, tight kind of guy with a great body, very regimented. And they both need one another because Oliver doesn't want to show up at his parents' anniversary party without a date. And he has a hard time maintaining relationships. So they decide they're going to help one another out and be fake boyfriends. The goal is for Oliver to be there at Luke's big annual fundraiser and get photographed along the way to become more respectable in the tabloids and whatnot. And then Luke will go with Oliver to this party. And it's only Luke's perspective, which I have to say I really liked because I've read a couple of romances with the dual perspective. And I'll read more of them. I know I have a couple already on my TBR that I'm looking forward to, but it was really nice just to get the one perspective because I felt really more deeply into the novel and like I wasn't going back and forth. So that was a pleasure. And then the narrator, oh geez, all these voices, he did such an amazing job. I would probably listen to another novel narrated by him just because it was such a pleasure. And there is a second novel in the series called Husband Material, which Joe Jameson also narrates. So that is definitely going to be in my ears sometime in the future. It's just a happy, feel-good kind of novel. Some things are just so ridiculous. Like Luke has a colleague who is of the upper crust who is just so dense and clueless that if I had read that, I think I would have just rolled my eyes and been like, But the narration, I was just like, oh, geez. I even started really liking that guy a lot. If you're looking for something that's feel good, just give it a go. Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall.
Sounds so fun.
Yeah, really loved it.
Well, I also read The Rom-Commers by Catherine Center. This was recommended during our last reading salon by Julie. I had never heard of the novel. I'd never heard of Catherine Center. Way late to the party. She has a lot of books out. I did listen to this, and it was narrated by Patty Murin. Great narrator, made the book come alive for me. I'm discovering that books that have a lot of dialogue I really enjoy as audiobooks, and this one was very heavy on dialogue. I also did read it because I just never wanted to stop. I was reading over a weekend when the Gentleman Caller was around, so I couldn't just be plugged in with my earbuds the whole weekend. And it's about Emma Wheeler, whose life has been interrupted by her family kind of falling apart due to an accident where her mother was killed and her father had physical problems that required caretaking, and Emma steps into that role as a full-time caregiver. She always wanted to be a writer. She was on her way to taking off in a career in that area when this accident occurred. So instead, she's at home living with her father and teaching writing. And her old high school boyfriend gets in touch with her and offers her a deal to come out to LA to help rewrite a rom-com written by a very famous writer who's had a lot of very successful films, but in the shoot 'em up, bang 'em up category, not in a rom-com category. And he's been asked to write a rom-com by somebody who's the wife of somebody. And if he does it, then he'll get the money for the movie he really wants to make, which is not this rom-com. So he wrote a terrible screenplay. She's brought in as a fixer. He does not know that this has been asked, so the initial meeting does not go very well. But eventually, because they're put in a house together, sitting at a desks across from each other, things start to change. I really loved it. One of the things that's very meta about it is as they're sitting and writing this rom-com, they describe the requirements of what makes a rom-com, nice. Which I think is really cute, and was really fun. I will definitely be reading more Catherine Center. I just thought the novel was well written and captured my attention and was a page turner. And I really wanted to see what happened.
Nice.
And it was kind of like a rom-com in a rom-com, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that meta vibe of that. So I read Afterward, which is another short story by Edith Wharton in that collection, Tales of Men and Ghosts, that I mentioned earlier. And this story was really surprising to me. I chose this one because it's often mentioned as one of her best ghost stories. And so I thought, well, I want to start with the best. It's about this couple, a man and a wife, who've made it big in Wisconsin. They became wealthy in Wisconsin to the point where they have moved to England, and they are looking for a very old home to live in that hopefully has a ghost. They really would love to have a ghost. So somebody they know hooks them up with this house. It's an old Tudor, so a very old house, home, a nice estate. And they talk about the ghosts. And she said, well, it happens afterwards. You don't realize it's a ghost until later.
Ooh, that's creepy.
Isn't it creepy? Yeah. Really, really good story. And this is one that was recently republished in its own binding as one of those little books that you see sometimes at the cash register at bookstores or in a little spinner rack by Kessinger Publishing. Afterward, it says Edith Wharton, A Ghost Story for Christmas. That's on the cover of that new little edition. Again, with Edith Wharton, so many good lines. And one of them that stood out to me in this story was, and I'm not going to talk too much about what the story is about because the unfolding is really important to read on your own, I think. But there's a line, older problems are, and this is the quote, inevitably crowded out of the foreground of consciousness by the new problems perpetually bubbling up from the vaporous cauldron of human experience.
Oh my gosh.
The vaporous cauldron of human. I was just like,
amen.
Man, such a good line. So well put. Great story. She put me right there and I could visualize everything. It was one of those kinds of stories. So highly recommend Afterward by Edith Wharton. You can grab it again for free at Project Gutenberg. And Project Gutenberg is free. You can make a donation, and I do donate occasionally because I think it's a great cause. And they do a wonderful job of actually editing the books, and sometimes you'll see that they'll be revised occasionally if any errors are found. So they're quality productions that you can rely on.
I finished Real Americans by Rachel Khong. This is her sophomore novel. Her debut novel was Goodbye Vitamin, which I adored. And I'll be honest with you, I've had this as an ARC for a long time on my e-reader and tried it several times and it just didn't grab me. And then when I was visiting Rachel in Traverse City, there was this beautiful hardcover copy that looked like it hadn't ever even been read in a little free library. So I thought, okay, here's my chance to actually pick up the paper and read it. And then I also got the audiobook, which has 3 narrators, Eric Yang, Eunice Wong, and Louisa Zahn. And it's told in 3 parts. So there's a narrator for each of the parts. It's almost like 3 novellas. And it starts with Lily in 1999. And then it moves to her son, Nick, in 2021. And then Lily's mom, Nick's grandmother, May, in the year 2030. So the story's kind of told, even though those dates are in order, it feels like it's being told backwards a little bit, because when you get to the end, May, who's the grandmother, is telling the story of her life and how Lily even came to be and how they ended up coming to America. So it was kind of confusing that way, but not in a bad way. You just had to really pay attention to what was happening in the story. Lily Chen is in New York City as a 22-year-old. She's a struggling intern. She's not getting paid and trying to make a go of it in New York, which isn't easy. And then she meets Matthew, who is a very wealthy young man who's already off in his career, and they fall in love. And then you get to part 2, and Nick is a teenager. He and Lily are now living in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm not going to spoil it because obviously it's in the reading of the book. That's the unfolding. And then 2030, when you get to May, you start to learn even more about what has happened in the family. And she's very elderly at this point, and she meets Nick and starts reflecting back on her life. I'm not quite sure what else to talk about because I don't want to ruin it. There are surprises and really big twists that you don't expect. There's a theme about what it means to be a real American, thus the title, Real American. And also there's this whole thread about genetics and epigenetics that I really was not expecting. I found it a little bit hard to get through. The audiobook helped me a lot. I did not like it as much as I liked Goodbye Vitamin, in the sense that that was just a real page turner telling the story of a young woman caretaking a parent with dementia. But this one had a lot of meat to it, and Rachel Khong was obviously trying to get the reader to think about really big thoughts. And I definitely think that that happened for me in reading it. So it's one that you want to give some time to if you're going to read it and be thoughtful about. And it's probably one you're going to want to either go then and watch an interview with Rachel Khong, which is what I did, or read it with someone you can talk to about it. Again, it's called Real Americans by Rachel Khong, and it is out now.
Nice. Well, the only other thing I read was Murder in the Smithsonian by Margaret Truman, which we'll be talking about later with John.
I read one picture book. Oh my gosh, Chris. I love this so much. It's called What Feelings Do When No One's Looking by Tina Oshizwitz and Alexander Zajac. I'm sure I butchered those names. This is translated from the Polish by Jennifer Croft, who is a very well-known translator. I came across this on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Frances Evangelista, who is a librarian, a school librarian, she wrote, "This is one of the most popular books in our school library. Look at the love dings and smudges. I'm about to get a second copy to meet demand. Don't forget the little people love translated fiction too."
Oh, fantastic.
And then Jenny Croft, who translated it, said, "This was my second favorite book I've ever translated."
Wow.
And that's saying a lot because she's translated Olga Tokarczuk. I mean, she's done a lot of translation of very revered books and famous people. And Frances Evangelista, we should say, is a podcaster also.
Right. Yeah. She is a co-host of One Bright Book along with Dorian and Rebecca. Dorian is an English professor and Rebecca is also an English professor and a board member of the National Book Critics Circle. Their podcast talks about one book at a time. They read a book and then they deep dive on it.
Yeah, it's really great. And this book is so sweet. It was not in any library nearby to me, so I drove quite a distance to get it because I have no self-control. And it has the sweetest cover with these little soft creatures that have the most beautiful eyes. And each page has a feeling. And then the illustrations really help to describe the feeling. So, for example, this one is sadness covers itself up with a blanket, and it's the little creature just covered in a beautiful quilt. And then there's one, this was one of my favorites. Excitement races to a friend with a newly discovered book. And it's a little creature just running with a book, smiling. So I really can see why kids would be drawn to this, because even if it's helping you understand feelings that are difficult, it's doing it with kindness and gentleness with the illustrations. Highly recommend this. I will be buying this for people I know this holiday season.
Love it. May I borrow that library copy in your hands?
Yes,
okay.
you may.
I look forward to that.
I know this may sound silly, but I could read this book every day. It's like one I could totally see having just on a bedside and picking it up and reading it every day. Again, it's called What Feelings Do When No One's Looking. Chris, did you go on any Biblio adventures?
I was unexpectedly out of town last week in Nebraska. Unfortunately, it was for a funeral. My beloved cousin Victor passed away unexpectedly. I did see a little free library there, which was fun driving into town. I flew into the Omaha airport, and they're under construction, and it's been probably decades since I've flown into Omaha because I've traditionally driven to Nebraska. But they have a wonderful Hudson Booksellers there. You know, they're a chain, an airport chain, really lovely curation and everything. A great kids Halloween display, which is fun to see. A lot of board books and up to younger reader books. One of the things about the trip was I had a connection in Charlotte, and at the airport there, I had like maybe an hour to walk around, which I did. I was stretching my legs. And in one of the little shops, it just looked like one of those little shops at the airport, you know, a grab and go kind of thing with snacks and food and whatever. But I kind of peeked in the back and I saw a whole wall of books. And then I walked in there and they had lovely tables and a wall of books, and then lots of magazines and coloring books and pencils and stuff. And it was empty. There was no one sitting back there. Granted, it was kind of early in the morning, but it was neat because there's a window that opens up onto the airfield. So it was lovely, nicely lit, great book selections, everything from new hardcovers to popular romances, anything you could think of, business books too, which I know are quite popular for airline travelers. So if you're in the Charlotte airport and you have a layover and you're looking for a place to hang out that's comfortable, check out that little store. I don't remember what section of the airport it is in, but I flew American, so it's in that terminal, whatever that should be. I mean, it was a very sad trip, but there's always books along the way, I feel like, everywhere that perk me up a little bit, no matter what's going on.
Yeah.
Thank God for books.
Yes. Amen. Speaking of which, we had our monthly reading salon with Patreons, which was so much fun. And we all brought a book to share this time. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
It made my TBR explode.
Absolutely, it did. Yes. And a couple holiday gift ideas came out of that one as well.
Yes,
yeah.
indeed.
Thanks
and,
to everybody.
Yeah, thank you everyone who participated. And just a reminder that if you're a patron at the $5 level or above, you can join us on our monthly reading salons, and we are having a great time. Next month, we're all going to bring our favorite author.
Yes.
Not with us, but in our minds.
Yeah, I already reached out to Stephen, and he can't make it. Yeah, Stephen King.
Mr. King?
Yeah. No. Yeah, I look forward to that. Yeah, so favorite author, and then maybe a couple of your top reads of theirs. I have a feeling we're going to have to, do some wrangling. At least I know I'll have to do some wrangling of myself.
Yeah, I'm trying not to stress out about it yet. I have a month to decide.
Well, I also did run over to Breakwater Books, our local independent bookstore, yesterday. We're recording this on October 30th. So the 29th of October was International Louise Penny Day, which means there was another release in the Chief Inspector Gamache series. This one is called The Gray Wolf, and it's the 19th book in the series. I haven't even read the jacket flaps. I haven't read any reviews. I don't want to ever know anything about a Louise Penny novel before I pick it up and start reading it. And as Emily mentioned, traditionally I take the day off and just sit and read. But since I was out of town the week before and my colleagues covered for me, I didn't think it was fair to
call in,
to do that.
Quote, sick.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and as I said, I am digging Armadale. So I made the decision last night on the way home from work. I thought, why do that to yourself? Like, finish Armadale, you're enjoying it, and you'll have all weekend to read Louise Penny.
Right on.
So chill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. These are the conversations we have to have with ourselves on the car, in the car rides.
It is amazing. All of the gyrations that readers can go through.
Yes.
Like, do I read this then or that? Do I put this down? Do I pick that up?
Yeah. I know. It's so hard to be us.
I mean, whatever decision you make, it usually works out in the long run. Yes.
So many books, so little time. Well, I attended an online event with Lori Gottlieb, and this was through the North Haven Library. The video is available online, so I will put a link in the show notes to that.
Cool.
She wrote a book called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, A Therapist, Her Therapist, and Our Lives Revealed, that Chris and I both really enjoyed. And it was about a time in her life where she had something surprising that happened to her, and she went to seek a therapist, and she kind of intertwined her own experiences in therapy and then her clients as well, with permission. So this conversation between her and a librarian was called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, Examining the Truths and Fictions We Tell Ourselves, with Lori Gottlieb. They did a really good job. The librarian was asking questions, but then also asking questions of people who were listening in. But I wanted to talk about two takeaways. One was about boundaries. And Chris and I tend to pick a word of the year. This year's been so busy, I had to remind myself recently what my word of the year is. But a few years ago, boundaries was my word of the year. And she reframed boundaries in a way for me that was like this light bulb went off, which is that a boundary is a rule you set with yourself, not with the other person. And I was just like, what? And she used an example of this client she had that was engaged to be married. She and her partner were, I think they were looking for a place to live, or they just were slightly unsettled. So they weren't ready to have children. And every time they went to her dad's house for supper, he would say, so when are you going to bring me a grandchild? I cannot. I'm sorry, people, but that's one of my pet peeves. I really don't like when people pressure their children in that way. Anyway, that wasn't her point. She said that this was her client, and she suggested to her client that she just tell her father, I don't want you to ask me that question anymore. When we are pregnant or decide to have children, we will be sure to let you know. And so she goes to her dad's house to have supper, and he asked that question. And Lori Gottlieb said, you don't get angry. You don't raise your voice. You just say, I'm going to leave, Dad, because I've asked you not to talk to me about that. So her point is you're not expecting the other person necessarily to meet your boundary. You're setting the boundary for yourself. And so if that person doesn't meet your expectation, you remove yourself from the situation. Mm-hmm. It was life-changing for me.
Awesome.
It sounds so simple. I've always been disappointed. You're not following the rules I'm setting for myself.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And it's really inconvenient to hold firm to your boundaries.
Yes. It's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can change, the rules of your own boundaries. But I just thought the way she framed it was so, especially the part about like, don't get mad. It's like, but I want to be mad. They're not doing what I want them to do. So I thought that was really interesting. And then towards the end, somebody asked the question, if you're looking for a therapist, do you have any recommendations about how to go about that? And she said, it's fine to ask people even therapists She said, I recommend people all the time, obviously not necessarily myself because I'm not taking new patients, or if it's someone I know and we'd feel uncomfortable. But she said, when you do that first meeting with a therapist, they should leave you feeling like you have something to think about, some questions. It shouldn't just be a meet and greet, because that helps you understand if you'll be able to work together. If they're asking you questions or making you thoughtful in a way that's going to allow you to do the work you need to do. Mm. And I thought that was really good advice, because I know that finding a therapist can be really hard, and that sometimes we need to change therapists depending on what work we're ready to do and what their training is, that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think especially as the years go by, like there's more specialties. And I think therapists get more training in certain types of therapy as well. So it is important to move around if you need to.
Yeah, go shopping. And I don't mean that in a mean way. Just really look for the type of help you need, depending on what you're facing in your life. So it was a really interesting conversation. I highly recommend it. And I will put a link in the show notes for folks.
Oh, I'm so glad that the video is available, because I really did enjoy that book. I thought it was fantastic. And I wish it would have gotten a lot more attention when it came out.
I'm not sure that it didn't, because she has a podcast and she's put out a workbook for it. That's the other thing. When you go to the link for the video, they had a bunch of links about her down below, including this workbook and her podcast and things like that. There might have been a television show. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
She's done well.
Nice. I didn't have any other Biblio adventures, but I want to give a shout out to Sue, who shared a wonderful Biblio adventure she took and did some video vlogging, I guess would be the right word, to New York. And she visited 2 bookstores there. So we'll put a link in the show notes. And that's Sue Jackson, who does the Big Book Summer Reading Challenge. And she's a YouTuber.
Yes, we'll put a link in the show notes. Thank you, Sue. Thank you to everyone who shares their Biblio adventures with us. I had one couch Biblio adventure where I binged Lincoln Lawyer Season 3. This is based on the book The Gods of Guilt by Michael Connelly. I've only read The Lincoln Lawyer, which was the first book in the series. Interestingly, this is the 3rd season of The Lincoln Lawyer, but I think it's the 5th book in the series. So it's interesting that they're not just doing it in order of how the books came out, which so far Slow Horses is doing it in order of the books. So interesting choice. There are 7 books in the Lincoln Lawyer series, and Michael Connelly is writing the 8th, I saw. I thought this season was fantastic. The Gods of Guilt refers to the jury. The main character in these stories is Mickey Haller, and he's a defense attorney, and he refers to the jury as the Gods of Guilt. And this one also has ghosts from his past that enter the story, which is interesting.
Like woo-woo ghosts, or just tormenting, like
his father, who was a very famous lawyer in his own right.
It's Halloween, man. It's like, I'm not sure what you mean by ghosts.
Ghosts of people in his past, including a client who he's trying to avenge her death.
All right.
I really enjoyed it. Lots of courtroom drama, which is my thing. And then the gentleman caller and I went to Deep River. We went there because I wanted to go to a bakery that has really good bread, which I accomplished, and the bread was delicious. And then we went to Bennett Books, which is a used bookstore that you introduced me to the last time we were there. let me just say, I was going to walk out without a book because I have a lot of books. And the gentleman caller was like, we have to buy books. It's the right thing to do. You're in a bookstore. So it wasn't hard for me to choose. I mean, at one point, I think I had 5 in my hand, but I brought one. Girl at War by Sarah Novich.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That is a book that Russell of Ink and Paper blog recommended to me. He actually sent me a copy of it, and I have not read it yet.
Do you want to do a buddy read, or is that too much pressure?
I can't take that on until next year because I have other things committed to, but I would give that a try because he thought I would really like it.
I really loved her novel True Biz, which I believe was her 3rd novel. This is her debut.
Yeah.
And it got great reviews.
Yeah, he loved it. I mean, he really raved on his YouTube channel. Are you going to read it soon?
I can be convinced to hold on to it if you want to do a buddy read.
Well, okay. I'm committed.
All right. Has anyone else read it? Let us know if you have. So I'm just going to read Victor Lavelle's blurb on the back. Sarah Novich isn't here to play games. Her debut novel, Girl at War, serves as the announcement of an audacious talent. Great war stories are engaging and rough and honest, and Novich's book is certainly all 3. But it's the fact that all this war is happening to a child that makes this book singular and special. You'll hold tight to this book as if you're going to protect the young girl at its center, but come to find out, she's the one with all the courage and all the strength.
That's a really great cover, too.
Yeah, and this book came out in 2015.
Yeah, and he had sent me an ARC. The copy I have is an ARC.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Well, we'll get on it. So that's the book I walked out with.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Nice.
Upcoming jaunts.
Well, I have one thing on the calendar. Author Elizabeth Hobbs, whose new book, Misery Hates Company, she is going to be in conversation with Karen E. Olson, whose new book is An Inconvenient Wife. This is going to be November 20th at 6:30 p.m. It's a Wednesday. And I have that on my calendar. RJ Julia here in Madison, Connecticut. I hope to make that because the book sounds really fun. It's a historical mystery set in Boston, a woman who's from a wealthy Boston family, and it's supposed to be kind of fun and dicey.
Yeah, it's got a great title.
I've read one by Karen Olson. I'm sorry the title is slipping my mind right now, but I just remember it was set in New Haven, and there was some New Haven pizza trash talk.
Ooh.
Maybe not exactly trash talk, but characters who had opinions about pizza. For those of you who are into pizza, New Haven thinks that they created American pizza, and there are some really big arguments and feuds that happen over pizza here with like the top 3 pizzerias.
Yeah.
So
it's real.
It is very real.
Well, I have on the calendar Saturday, November 23rd from 10 to 4 is the Connecticut Book Festival. And this is going to take place at the West Hartford Conference Center. There's free admission and free parking. And there's going to be over 50 authors there, including books for kids and kids activities. So it could be a very fun way to spend the day.
Yeah, that sounds like a good time.
Yeah.
How about upcoming reads? What's on your nightstand?
Well, I have one that I'm very interested in called The New Menopause, Navigating Your Path Through Hormonal Change with Purpose, Power, and Facts by Mary Claire Haver, who's a doctor. I heard an interview with her, and there's a lot of talk now about people starting to use hormone replacement therapies. There had been this study done back in the early 2000s that made it sound like hormone replacement therapy was a terrible thing. There's been a lot of disputing of that study that was done that made that big turnaround. And now there's new studies being done and a lot of women having success with hormone replacement therapy that is showing that you can not only get through menopause in a more healthy manner, but have a much healthier older adult life once you've passed through menopause. So I'm very curious about it, and we'll report back once I learn more.
There's probably new hormones too, right? I mean,
yeah.
So,
and new tests. Like one person I recently talked to who is taking hormone replacement therapy said before her doctors even let her talk about it, they said, go have the BRCA test done, which is a test to see if you have the gene for things like breast cancer and cervical cancer. Because one of the reasons that hormone replacement therapy was looked down upon was that they thought that it affected women's cardiovascular health negatively and could potentially increase your risk for cancer. I don't know if you remember when we were talking to Sarah Franklin, who wrote The Editor, but both Julia Child and Judith Jones had breast cancer and thought that it might have been caused by their use of hormone replacement therapy. So times have changed. People who were on the early versions of the birth control pill know that those early doses of birth control were much too big and strong, and it changed over the course of history as well. I'm not at all suggesting that I'm in favor of hormone replacement therapy. I'm just saying I'd like to learn more since the tides have changed of late.
It's interesting. And also people talk about breast cancer much more than they used to. Like Willa Cather had breast cancer, and that hadn't been uncovered until a few years ago. So women may have had higher rates of breast cancer historically than we really understand.
Well, and people didn't talk about menopause, right, either. I just read this thing that said there are 1 billion women going through menopause right now. More than 1 billion.
I will not make a corny global warming joke.
Oh, good one. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just something to be talked about and something to think about. I know women who have bone loss, and it's not just about hot flashes. It's about your future health and how to live a good life. So I'm very curious to read more about that.
Yeah, always good to learn. Oof. And then I purchased recently the first volume of the illustrated Varney the Vampire, or The Feast of Blood. Varney the Vampire was a real popular series that started in the 1840s about a vampire named Varney, I guess. I have never read any of these. I've read about Varney and its impact. A lot of people have recently discovered that Bram Stoker wasn't the first person to write about vampires. There's a long tradition of vampires in literature. Varney is one of them. This is a new edition typeset from the original woodcut illustrations that still exist, which is really impressive. The one thing I do know just from glancing at the introduction is that Varney, one of his claims to fame, at least in terms of literary history, he's the first vampire to be portrayed sympathetically.
Oh, interesting.
That he felt really bad and tormented about what he needed to do to survive and felt bad about inflicting pain and things like that. But the woodcuts are really expressive, you know, in that mid-19th century style. And I didn't realize this is the first volume. And how many pages is this?
Oh my gosh, it's so big.
It is an oversized paperback, and it's 638 pages. So I'm not sure how I'll read this, if I'll read one story a week or something like that. I can't imagine sitting down and reading it straight through, but who knows?
And how many volumes are there? Do you know?
I think there's 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
But super popular.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, up next is our conversation with our mystery man, John Valeri, who has been on the podcast many times. We invite him to come to talk with us about all things mystery related. He has offered us lists of good mystery books in the past. We do have a tab on our website called Guests. And if you go there, you can see every episode that John has been on. It's been a lot. We love our mystery man.
Yes, we do. And so we're talking about Murder in the Smithsonian by Margaret Truman. I think it was a really wonderful conversation. We could have kept talking for a long, long time. One of the things I wanted to add, we did a little bit of research in Publishers Weekly looking at some of the things that had been said or how her books have performed, Margaret Truman. And so this book, Murder in the Smithsonian, came out in 1983, and looking at the bestseller paperbacks from 1984 when the mass market version came out. So it came out first in hardcover, and then like a year later it came out in that small pocket size paperback. We just thought it'd be fun to give you an idea of some of the other books that were on the bestseller list at that time. Now, she was not on the bestseller list at this time. She was in a category called Mass Market Candidates, as we think, an upcoming hot title. But some of the other mass markets that were on the bestseller list at that time was The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, which is, I know, still very much read by a lot of people. Out on a Limb by Shirley MacLaine. Light a Penny Candle by Maeve Binchy. And then in the trade paperback category, now these are what we think now as paperback. I think they're much more popular. They're a little bit larger. The papers are a little bit sturdier. They're not the cheap paper of the mass market. Some of the books in there, The Color Purple by Alice Walker was a big one. The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. And Living, Loving, and Learning by Lee Bascaglia. And then there were also some film-to-book titles, too, like Star Trek. There was a book called Gremlins by George Gipp, and also Danielle Steele, Crossings. I have not read a book by her.
Oh, I used to love Danielle Steele. Probably back around then. I used to love her back in the 80s.
Yeah, very cool. For those of you who are new and you're not aware of who John is, he is a reviewer of mysteries. He's been published in a lot of different review outlets like the New York Review of Books, Mystery Scene Magazine, Criminal Element, Crime Fiction. He also interviews a lot of mystery authors. He has his own YouTube channel called Central Booking, where he talks with writers of all genres. And he's just a great all-around guy. We love him, and we hope you enjoy our conversation with John.
And John recently told us that this time of year, which is October, if he were to donate blood, it would run pumpkin spice.
Happy reading!
Welcome, John.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's always an honor to be here.
We are so excited to have John here today because the three of us did a buddy read of Murder in the Smithsonian by Margaret Truman. This was Margaret Truman's fourth mystery. She wrote some biographies also, but this was her fourth mystery novel.
And it came out in 1983. There was actually a bidding war for it. For her third novel, it sold for $65,000. And for the fourth novel, this one, Murder in the Smithsonian, the bidding war ended at $100,000 for this book. It came out in hardcover. We all read the mass market paperback, that's a little small pocket-sized book that I found at the Book Barn in Niantic for $1 each. So, of course, I had to buy all three, knowing that I had two willing friends / victims who would read it with me.
She wrangled us, everybody.
I was an easy wrangle. It didn't take much.
Well, I was interested in Margaret Truman because I stumbled across her at a little free library earlier this year, and it clicked my memory like, oh yeah, I'd heard that the daughter of the United States President, Harry Truman, had written mysteries. So that's how it got bumped up further onto my TBR.
And John, had you ever read a Margaret Truman?
I'd read a few, but I have like a really visceral memory of buying a couple of her books at tag sales when I was really, really young. Like that started my whole love of mystery, was going to tag sales and finding books that looked just like this. They were mass market, really vintagey, yellowed edges, obviously well loved and thumbed through. And I had a couple Margaret Trumans and, Agatha Christie's, and then I really kicked in with Mary Higgins Clark. But when Chris delivered this particular copy of the book to me, it took me right back to the ones that I used to own, even though I didn't read them at the time. The first Margaret Truman I ever read was Murder at Ford's Theater, and I read that specifically because my wife Chelsea and I visited Washington, D.C. in 2012, and I wanted to read something relevant to that, and I was really into, well, this will surprise everybody, but the Abraham Lincoln assassination, so I figured that was the perfect book. But this is really only the second of the true sort of original Margaret Trumans that I'd ever read, but it took me right back like decades. So thank you, Chris, for reminding me of just how old I am.
My pleasure. And I think you're the youngest one here, so watch it, buddy.
Yay me.
I know, it took me back to my teenage years, I guess. That's how I felt when I was reading this. It was very dated in a lot of ways.
So before we get into some of those wonderful dated details, Who among us would like to give a brief synopsis to our wonderful listeners about this novel?
Oh, I nominate either one of you.
I vote for Chris.
Oh, come on.
You're so good at it.
Second, look, this is democracy in action, which seems appropriate.
We just voted.
We vote for you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so this novel is about a murder that happens in the Smithsonian, which is in Washington, D.C. Again, this is in the early 80s. There is a famous scholar of post-Revolutionary War era secret societies. And he had earlier declined an invitation to be a keynote speaker at the opening of this exhibit, which the centerpiece is the Hansa Medal, which was representative of this one secret society. He's in England. He's an American. He's in England. He visits a friend who is a collector there in England, a British guy. He tells him this secret. The person who dies changes his mind. He decides he's going to go to the Smithsonian and be the keynote speaker and then reveal this scandalous thing that's happening at the Smithsonian. Well, he doesn't really have a chance. There is a lot of stuff in this book about people not telling each other stuff, which is an easy way to create a mystery, right? I don't know that that flies anymore as well. And I'm sorry, I'm getting into commentary when I'm supposed to be summarizing. Long story short, the man ends up stabbed by a sword once owned by Thomas Jefferson, and he plummets from the third floor down to the center where the Foucault's pendulum is swinging back and forth and splats. He's dead.
And this was after he had taken the vice president aside and told him. So now you're wondering.
Now you're wondering what's going on. There's a British connection, scholarly connection, secret society connection. The vice president of the United States is one of the, leaders of the Smithsonian, and he's really into history, which pleases everybody at the Smithsonian, who are usually treated like second-class citizens because it's just history and who cares. So all of these people now are investigating what happened. The vice president's interested. There's a detective, homicide captain, I should be specific, who comes to investigate the murder. And he's kind of the hero of the book, the protagonist, the main protagonist. Then along comes the murdered man's fiance from Scotland. She's a museum curator. She's in her early 30s. This is slight commentary. She's treated like a 12-year-old practically. But she's like, I'm not leaving Washington until I find out who killed my fiance. So she and the captain of homicide have a thing going between them. Of course, there's a little romantic tension. And the story takes off from there. There's action in D.C., there's action in England and Scotland. So it has that cosmopolitan feel, which is a word that isn't used anymore.
People jet on the Concorde back and forth.
Yes. Yeah, the Concorde makes an appearance. There are a couple suspects. Some of them are a little bit more red herring-y than others. But Publishers Weekly, in their quote review, which was more of a summary, which is a better summary than I'm giving here, said it had a dandy plot.
I know, I love that word.
Yeah,
dandy.
Yeah, dandy plot. So in the end, we do find out who murdered him. We find out kind of who the bad guys are.
And learn some history.
Yeah, and who wants to go first?
Bravo.
Well, first, let me say, I think that was a very serviceable summary, and I applaud you.
Well, thank you so much.
Bravo.
Thank you so
Bravo.
much.
We put you on the spot, and you delivered.
And it's 9 a.m.
Yeah,
So.
we put Chris on the spot early morning. I do want to say that there is a lot of action around the mall and in the Smithsonian's, I should say the mall in Washington, D.C. And that part was really cool. Margaret Truman spent part of her young adult life there, and it's obvious that she knows what she's talking about when it comes to geography. And I really appreciated that part. How did you guys feel about the place?
I agree. I thought it had a really strong sense of place, and having been there, again, it brought it kind of back for me. But the funny thing is, we went to the Smithsonian when we were in Washington, and, I remembered the Hope Diamond and the First Lady's gown exhibit and the big elephant sculpture thing that's on display, which I made my wife pose behind the backside. But I did not have any memory whatsoever of the pendulum. Like, none.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's a real thing.
Yeah.
I had to look it up, and I looked at a picture, and I still am like, I'm not sure that I saw that, even though I did. But I will say in the book, it's very, very cinematic, to have blood dripping down, and then comes the body with a sword sticking out of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And is it pronounced the Foucault pendulum or?
I thought so.
Yeah, it is. It's very dramatic in this book because it's described how it's going back and forth. And then this guy plummets to his death as the pendulum swings.
And slaps into his dead body.
Right.
Yeah. So look up the pendulum. It's really interesting. It proves that the earth is turning. I liked the location a lot. I think it was fun to have been there too and to know some of the locations they're talking about. I also thought like, wow, one of the Smithsonian museums I went to in recent years is it the African American Cultural and History Museum? I always get the name wrong and I apologize for that. But it's like that, I don't even think was a glimmer in anyone's eyes yet.
Yeah.
Back in 1983. So it's also interesting to think about how that landscape has changed.
Yes.
Yeah. But it was neat. And it made me interested in some of the other ones. Like there's one murder at the Library of Congress. So many. How many did you say she wrote?
23.
Yeah.
And this was the 4th. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I really loved about it was because it took place in 83 or in the 80s, we should say, there weren't cell phones, there weren't cameras everywhere. There were times when I was doubting and then I was like, oh, there weren't cameras everywhere. Right. There was a lot of phone booth calling, which cracked me up.
Yeah. Well, one thing too, talking about that, like the security. So I think if a museum curator read this today, they would have heart palpitations because the electronic security system is kind of new at this time. And they just decided to turn it off because there were so many false alarms.
Right.
Which, I think like a younger reader might think like, ooh, that's part of the inside jobness of this. But I think as a person who grew up with these electronic developments happening, there used to be anyway so many false alarms that I could see people being like, oh, dear God, we just don't have the resources to keep up with these things. And it's annoying. And so that to me smacked as kind of a true situation that wasn't necessarily part of any scheme.
Right. And they thought if they just had a sign on it, people would believe that it was armed and not try anything.
Which is what people do now with house alarms.
Yeah.
Or, stores that put up cameras knowing that they don't work, just thinking that the mere sight of it will be a deterrent.
Yeah. And in this day and age, I think that's in some ways true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I worked at a restaurant where someone stole a bunch of things and we had police come in and say, just install the cameras. You don't have to turn them on. And I was surprised that even police officers were telling people to do that.
Yeah. The characters in this book, as I mentioned, the woman character, the fiance who comes over from Scotland demanding to find answers. She's not leaving until she finds out who killed her fiance. She kind of is treated as a child in some ways. And she's 34, I think. She's a museum curator. Like, she has a career, yet her fiance, who's in the same field, doesn't tell her about this scandal that he's aware of, which you think like, oh, come on. Who wouldn't tell their fiance about that, right?
I didn't even think about that.
Maybe he wanted to keep her safe. It's dangerous knowledge. And then she comes to Washington to be the damsel in distress.
Her uncle is the dude who donated the Medal of Hansa.
Right.
Right? It's in his castle in Scotland is where it had been on display for the longest time. Yet no one really talks with her about that. I mean, do they even talk? Oh, well, she has some papers from the Hansa Secret Society.
Right.
She puts them in the museum safe, right? So then when her hotel room gets flipped, she doesn't tell anybody that she had those papers in the safe. They don't ask her if anything's missing. I mean, that's another weakness of the mystery that I think today would be handled in a different way. Because every little bit of info these days in a mystery is in there, or else it's going to get a bad review because it's that you can't withhold information from the reader. That's not cool anymore.
That's true. Can I add two things to that really quickly?
Please.
One, I think as unbelievable as it may be that poor Heather McBean, didn't really know anything about what was going on. I think had she known, it would have been a really, really short book. But also, I had the same problem with the fact that she puts these papers in the hotel safe and then her room gets destroyed. And it's kind of obvious that that's what somebody's looking for. But I think part of this book was more thriller-esque than mystery. And I think from the very beginning, readers have a strong idea of at least one person who might be involved. And so I think that lends itself to the reader having more information pretty much than anybody else, though I do also think that it's very obvious that that's what they were looking for. And so the fact that she didn't mention that, well, I do have these papers pertaining to the stolen metal, but they're in a different safe, in a different location. I do think that probably would have been pertinent information. But I do think that this isn't just a stereotypical mystery. I think there's some more thriller elements to it, or at least that was my take on it.
Yeah, I agree. I felt that way too. And I think that you weren't even really sure what the dead fiance, what he was going to say. Like, did he know, or was he just suspecting? Did he know who the players were? It was unclear to me, even what he knew. So what he would have told her.
Yeah.
And we didn't know if the vice president was involved, because the vice president was the last person he had whispered to.
Right. And then there's also a conservative Republican guy who is a big collector, who is one of the red herrings, possibly.
Maybe it's not a red herring.
Yeah, maybe he did do it.
Okay. No spoilers here. So, and I was just looking at my note, and it's actually called the Harsa medal. The Harsa Cincinnati. I think I called it Hansa.
Well, and one thing I will say about this book is it made me look a lot of things up, including that. There was a lot of historical things dropped that I was like, I have no idea what she's talking about. I have to look this up. And then even my gentleman caller next to me was like, why would Thomas Jefferson have a sword? Because he gets killed by Thomas Jefferson's sword. And I was like, I don't know. You tell me.
All men had one back then.
I mean, it is kind of a question. He was like, you'd never even fought in a battle. And I was like, well, someone probably gave it to him.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It could have been a ceremonial one, a gift, I mean, there are paintings of George Washington with his sword, but then he was a combatant in various wars. So that makes sense. Alan Alda makes an appearance.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, not actually the man, but Alan Alda.
I have that whole thing. Yeah.
You want to read that?
This made me laugh so hard. So this guy who plummets to his death is very handsome, apparently. And so I think these are volunteers at the museum are talking about him. And this is said after they show what they're going to read about Dr. Lewis Tooney, who's the guy who plummets to his death. One of the volunteer women says, I can't wait to meet him. He's so handsome in his pictures. Looks like Alan Alda. Another woman laughed. You're giving away your age. Alan Alda appeals to more mature women who appreciate sensitivity in men. Sensitivity in men? What's that? They both laughed. Oh my God, on so many levels, right?
Yeah, I know. Because when you think about Alan Alda now, we won't talk about MASH. That's a rabbit hole we can go down another day. But yeah, I love that because he was a leading man and also in movies. And he played that sensitive man, but what was considered sensitive back then.
But were men allowed to be sensitive? I mean, that just cracked me up.
Is it even a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it, John? Tell us. What was your perspective as a man reading that section?
I also chuckled. I did not highlight it, but I laughed for a multitude of reasons. But people often tell me I am a sensitive man, more so than most. So I don't know. I think there's such a thing, and I don't think it started with me. So.
Well, a lot of the characters in this book, Emily mentioned it being dated in a lot of ways, and it is. The word transvestite is applied to a group of men who have a house party that gets raided, which is definitely something that happened, at least in my life in the Marine Corps, with anything that smacked of not heterosexual behavior. Raids happened back then, and they were used as a way to control people, to blackmail some people, and it could ruin people's career. And one thing I appreciated about our leading man, Hanrahan, is the captain of this investigation. He thinks that's awful that these lists are then handed around about who were at these parties that get raided. So that was a nod towards him being a more sensitive, enlightened man.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah.
He's also like the classically divorced detective type figure. But he's not necessarily that down on his luck because he has a passionate hobby, which it made me happy for Emily to read about.
Yes, he was a very good cook. Yes, even making Welsh rabbit at one point. Yeah, and actually the other thing I really appreciated, and I thought, you go, Margaret Truman, is he was divorced from a woman who cheated on him, which is somewhat unusual, and cheated on him with a very younger man. So she was a cougar.
Oh, the whole sexual liberation thing. And so, like, in some ways, I was at first thinking, like, well, good for her, you know, like women are exploring their possibilities in more radical ways than they'd been allowed in past, at least en masse, right? But then she's really not portrayed. I mean, she's portrayed as kind of like that wishy-washy, whiny, oh, I didn't mean it kind of
she
person.
Comes back. She comes crawling back.
Yeah.
And, you know, we won't tell you what happens.
We won't tell you what happens, but yeah, there's a son involved. And I did enjoy his, he has to go to parties with the family, which he does not like. Yeah, so anyway, he was a good character. I enjoyed him.
Now,
I liked him as well.
Yeah, I did too. What did you guys think? There was one part where I was flying through the novel, and then I felt like when Heather and Evelyn, I think is how you said his name, which I thought was funny. They made it clear how to pronounce it. Evelyn. Jet over to England and go to Scotland. I felt like it got a little bogged down during that part. How did you guys feel?
It was a bit of a diversion. And I have to say, and I checked this, the chapters got much longer.
Oh, did they?
In Washington, it was mostly short chapters. And then there was this diversion, and all of a sudden you're getting much longer chunks. And I think that made it feel a bit longer too. I kind of liked the diversion, but I think maybe if it had been broken down a bit differently, it wouldn't have changed the readability so much. But I do agree that there was a difference there.
Yeah, I kind of liked it. I thought it was a little heavy-handed because he seemed a little bit too Evelyn. I mean, you know, it's just kind of like, oh, I can see him twirling his mustache, you know? I was just like, come on. You know, the fact that he's fat, it's one of the things that makes him a suspect in this book, the way it's presented. Just like some of the other bad guys, it's an Arab guy and it's a Mexican guy.
Yeah. The descriptors of people were really offensive, but, you know, I had to say, okay, this is 1983, you know, or the 80s that she's writing this, but yeah.
It's just so casually said. And I remember reading books like that, and even reading this one, it's just kind of like, yep, that's kind of how it was, you know? Right. And I'm glad our world has expanded a lot in those directions.
It is interesting, though, because it was really stereotypical, and like it was the same kind of things that people take offense with now, and rightly so. And, you know, the books of Agatha Christie and her depictions of characters, and even like, you know, the early Nancy Drew books. But I will say, and this sort of goes back to Chris's point when she was talking about Hanrahan and his feelings about the raids on the, quote, you know, transvestite parties or people, you know, hating because of the cross-dressing or just being homosexual. But I will say, in some ways, it struck me as a bit progressive in the fact that he came right out and said, look, I don't care if you do these things. I don't care if you're gay. The only reason I would care is if it has bearing on the case. So that I appreciated, because I think that was a bit forward thinking of Truman at that time. But unfortunately, you do find all those other kind of, you know, stereotypes that you would hope not.
Yeah. One thing about Hanrahan that I'm just looking at, I looked down at my notes quickly. At the party that he goes to, he says, this wasn't the time to belt his wife or his ex-wife. Yes. And I was just like, oh, Hanrahan. That was a bit of a different change in tone. But you realize, too, like the tension he feels with having to be there. They also had a son together who is hopeful that they're going to get back together because the ex has been going around telling everyone they're going to get back together. So it's like, right. Oh, thanks. Yeah. Now I'm the bad guy when he was the one who got kind of screwed over initially. One thing I would like to talk about, too, is the assistant investigator, Joe Pearl, who was Hanrahan's right-hand guy. He is tailing one of the suspects at one point, right, in a restaurant. And this ex-officer really blows his cover in this bar. I was like, God, what an asshole. And then we find out later that Joe, the good cop, later slashed the guy's tires. Yes. I'm just like, holy hell. Like, that is definitely not something that is good guy behavior in a novel these days for a cop
But you
to do
could get
that.
away with it then because it was not a surveillance state like
Right,
it is now.
not a surveillance
Exactly.
state at all. Nobody can film you doing that, right, on their cell phone.
I know, and Hanrahan was kind of like, you shouldn't have done that. And he was like, well, he made me mad. And he
Got it
kind of
coming.
was making poor decisions because he was drinking, right? The guy was in a bar. He asked for his keys so he can go because he was made. Remember?
Oh, see, but that was one of the things I had to read twice. He asked for his keys to use the other guy's car to make the other guy believe he didn't have a car, but he did have a car.
Oh, interesting.
Because I think he was trying to throw off the guy he was tailing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then he got the keys and went and slashed the guy's tires
Right.
and came back with and said,
Well-
never mind. Then went and got into his own
Yeah.
car. Yeah.
Well, and speaking about drinking, oh my lordy Lou, there was a lot of drinking in this book and day drinking. Like,
Yes, I was going to say, when you can do that on the job, another,
Yeah.
one of those points to how things have changed. You can, go have 2-hour lunches, drink, smoke, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Go meet
And
in
get
the
paid.
Smithsonian to, ask a potential suspect a question over scotch at noon.
So I have to say, I started reading this on a plane. It felt so great to be reading this mass market novel on a plane, because it just takes you back, right? And back when this novel came out, had I been reading it then, I would have been having a drink and smoking a cigarette on the plane because you used to be able to do
Yes,
that.
both things.
Yeah. So times have definitely changed, but yeah, so much day drinking.
Yeah. I thought that was like, wow, we're definitely reading a book in the 80s.
Professional day drinking. you
Yeah,
know?
like, detectives.
and museum curators and
Yeah.
directors. Yeah.
Yeah.
One other funny thing I have to say, and I was wondering about Margaret Truman's history with this because as the Publishers Weekly called this a cosmopolitan novel, and we know that she's the president's daughter. There's one part in the book when McBean is up in Scotland at the ancestral castle, right?
This is the fiance.
The fiance. And the Edinburgh police had been investigating her uncle's death, and they ruled it a suicide. And she never thought that he would do that, nor did his close friends. And there's a line that says about the Edinburgh police that they were sloppy, lazy, not unusual. They look for the easy way out too often. And I thought, wow, she calls them sloppy and lazy. And I just thought that is kind of a big, knife in the back, I think, for a police force to hear coming from a president's daughter. So I was wondering if there was some kind of past issue that she had or that her dad had with a major international city's police department.
Wow, that I don't know. I feel like we need to research, regroup, part 2.
I know, right?
What did we find?
Well, I mean, it does beg the question, how careful did she have to be writing these books? Or did people know it was all in good fun and fiction?
I wonder. I mean, it's just kind of interesting because I just thought, ow, that was pretty harsh.
Yeah, and who knows what their reputation was in the 80s? We don't know.
Right. Yes, because they weren't Scotland Yard. Exactly.
Yeah.
They could have a reputation like the Chicago Police Department. Oops, I didn't say that out loud.
And she's on another list.
Okay, so speaking of lists, I just wanted to say we read a little research from Publishers Weekly about Margaret Truman. Some funny, well, now looking back, one of them at least was funny that her agent negotiated the sale of this book in particular in her bathing suit in Bermuda at a sales conference, which, it was a funny piece. But one of the things, this book and a couple of her books were going to be produced as either movies or theater pieces. The rights were bought by Paramount. I don't know if that ever happened. I haven't looked into that yet. But the article mentioned that these books were really successful overseas. They were very popular in Great Britain, Germany, Israel, Denmark, Yugoslavia, Japan, Brazil, Holland, Norway, Mexico, Spain, and Italy. I thought that was a really interesting list, and I was surprised that France wasn't on it.
Maybe she offended them in another one of the books.
Well, I mean,
This is the fourth.
you got to wonder because France. I mean, the French love mystery novels, don't they? I mean, so anyway, and they just lumped Great Britain together. So who knows what the Scottish readers thought of her?
Right, exactly. Well, I'm really glad we read it. I have to say there was a point, like I did feel like it got bogged down. And John, thank you for pointing out that those chapters got longer. I never bothered to look at that. There was a point towards 3/4 of the way where I was convinced that more pages were being added as I was reading. And that's usually a sign to me, like, maybe you're not enjoying this book, because it really started off strong for me. And then I feel like it got a little bogged down. But I did like the action that as the mystery is being solved, because you do find out what happens, there were a lot of action scenes on the mall during July 4th.
Right.
And I really enjoyed that part, and it brought me back to the story. And I thought this could make a good movie. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it ever was. We'll have to look into that and get back to you all. What were your overall feelings about it, John, as we sign off?
I liked it as well. I liked reading a book set in the 80s that was actually written in the 80s, because I think nowadays when that happens, it's a convenient excuse not to have to worry about cameras and cell phones and technology. But that was the truth of the times. And like I said, it was very nostalgic for me. And I found the book, in this presentation very appealing, both texturally and what's that fancy word, aesthetically, like the look of it, the feel of it, everything about it was very welcoming. I do agree it started really, really quickly. There were points, I think, where it lost a bit of pacing, but then at the end, it gained it back. So I enjoyed it a lot, and I was happy to revisit these early books, and you guys gave me a great excuse to do that, so thank you.
Yeah, I agree too with what you all are saying. Started off really strong. It almost made me feel a bit like the Da Vinci Code, this expert going into an institution and things happening from there. I'd be curious to read another one by her. I know John has a little info about her.
I do have a little info for you. It's kind of fun because I know people won't be listening to this for a little bit, but we're recording on October 30th, so it's the day before Halloween, and I can tell you that Margaret Truman had a ghost. And when I say a ghost, Margaret Truman had a ghostwriter for a very, very, very long time. It wasn't public knowledge until around 2011, but I learned that a couple years prior because I happened to be friends with her ghost and didn't really know it until her ghost invited me and Chelsea over to dinner and took us downstairs to the office space where there were those big, you know how they have those cover blow-ups that are like oversized, large book cover sort of like posters? Well, I'm looking around the office and here's a Margaret Truman book and there's a Margaret Truman book and there's another one over there. And this person turns to me and says, well, now you know my secret.
Oh
and
my God.
Person, yes.
A mystery about the mystery.
Yes. And now I'm going to tell you who it was. And you can find this information now, but it was Donald Bain who wrote the Murder, She Wrote books. He wrote the first 46 Murder, She Wrote books in collaboration with Jessica Fletcher, but also, with his daughter and then with his wife, collaborated with Margaret Truman from the second book all the way until his death, which included, I think, 6 books posthumously, which his name actually appeared on, but his name didn't appear on a Margaret Truman book until 2015, I think, Monument to Murder, but he'd been writing them with her since the very second book. And there was also another author who, in his self-written obituary, said that he, too, was a collaborator, and it was William Harrington. I don't know as much about him. He actually wrote the Columbo tie-in novels, but I'm wondering if he maybe helped out with the first book.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask
you. There you go.
you.
Donald Bain, who wrote over 120 books, maybe 150 books, was very prolific, writing under a variety of names, men's names, women's names, media tie-in. He kind of did it all, but he would occasionally allude to the fact that he had collaborated on a very long-running, best-selling mystery series and would never say what it was until a few years after Margaret Truman actually passed away. And then just sort of casually, he mentioned to Publishers Weekly that it was him, but it was sort of one of those secrets that some people knew and just didn't talk about. But that was another reason I was really happy to revisit this book, because he was a great guy, and he was, for all of his success, couldn't have been more down to earth. And you'd be in a room with him, and he'd make you feel like the important person in the room. And I will also tell you, he had a room in his house. He had an amazing condo in Danbury with his wife. And so downstairs, they had this great office space. There would be commonplace in the middle, and then each had an office, one on each side. And then they would sort of come together and compare notes because they would be writing the same books together. Like they would both be working on a Murder, She Wrote book. And then they would come together and talk about it. But he also had a room upstairs with like all the first edition Murder, She Wrote books. Like my jaw hit the floor and he's like, I don't think I can leave you alone in this room. I'm like, yeah, probably not. They held me upside down at the door. You know, things were falling out of my pockets. I was never invited back.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That is so interesting.
Isn't that shocking?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, how does it work with the ghostwriter and the money? Like, if this Murder in the Smithsonian sold for $100,000, do they split the money, or is it just an agreement negotiated case by case?
Yeah, I think it depends on the contract. I would assume, you know, either a lump sum or a certain percentage. He was very gracious in saying that they were close collaborators. I honestly wonder how close they were. I mean, I'm sure that she knew the plots, but that was probably more his doing. I think she probably shared a lot about place, but he also would say things like, it's Washington, D.C., like nothing is too far-fetched for Washington, D.C., which makes for great mysteries and thrillers. But yeah, I don't know what the actual agreement was between them, but he was always very much a gentleman and always willing to give people credit for what they did or, you know, maybe didn't do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, really interesting collaboration and kind of funny that it stayed secret for that many years and that many books.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, John, you're always full of such great information and so many
When you said
fascinating...
Margaret Truman, I was like, oh my God, do I have a scoop for you if you don't ever already know it?
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yes.
Wow. Fun.
All right. So,
Interesting.
John, you get to pick the next buddy read that the three of us do.
Oh, I do. Oh, the pressure.
Yeah.
That's
so
fun. All right, I'm going to think on
put
that.
your thinking cap on and
Because
maybe...
we've done the Agatha Christie, right? We
Yes.
did Death on the Nile. Is that the one we did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And then we've done this, Murder in the Smithsonian, Margaret Truman. Okay.
And Death on the Nile was your idea, I think.
I believe so,
Yeah,
because I
'cause-
wanted to see the movie.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And so Margaret Truman was my idea. So, John, you're up next.
No pressure.
All right, the thinking hat is on. It's
All right.
a hard-working hat.
Thank you so much.
Oh, of course. Thank you for having me. And thank you for, like I said, the reason to read this book, because otherwise I probably never would have fitted in. Dated as it was still a joy to read.
Awesome.
Even to just chuckle and say, Don, you didn't just write that. Yes, you did.
Thanks for listening to The Book Cougars with Chris Wallach and Emily Fine. We'll be back again with another episode in 2 weeks. Until then, come chat with us on social media, Goodreads, or email us at bookcougars@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support our podcast, please tell others about us, leave a review wherever you listen, and consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month is a big help. Learn more about that on our website, bookcougars.com, where you'll find the show notes for this and all of our past episodes.
Thanks, everybody.
This episode was edited by Pat Keogh Sound Design.